On that gala night, where the glint of the chandeliers reflected more arrogance than elegance, no one paid attention to the black man sitting discreetly in the back, wearing a simple suit, the kind of presence that proud eyes choose to ignore. The orchestra played, glasses clinked, and exaggerated laughter spread through the hall like cheap perfume. Then, the woman in the emerald green dress, drunk with pride, approached him with a venomous smile, raised her wine glass, and, in front of everyone, poured the crimson liquid over his head, as if branding the skin of someone considered inferior. The hall erupted in laughter, flashes, and cruel comments, but he remained motionless. He merely raised his face, and in that gaze was a calmness so powerful that only someone who knows their true worth can possess it. Hours later, when the $500 million contract was placed on the table, he broke his silence. "Funny, you celebrated my humiliation before you found out that I own the company that's about to buy yours." And at that moment, no laughter found the courage to continue existing. Before we delve into this amazing story, tell me which city and state you're watching from. Leave a comment and I'll reply with gratitude. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like this video. We want to share more stories like this. The company's meeting room was impeccably decorated, overflowing with an elegance that seemed designed to impress more than to celebrate, as if each golden arrangement, each glittering chandelier, and each perfectly aligned glass served only to reinforce the silent hierarchy that dominated that environment. Everyone there knew the game. To show off, to smile too much, to speak loudly, to compare numbers, to display power. In the midst of this setting designed for the rich who love to appear even richer, the black man occupying a discreet chair in the corner seemed out of place, like a detail no one wanted to notice, especially when he wasn't wearing the right brands or showing desperation to be seen. He observed everything with a serene gaze, but full of a depth that no one there could decipher, like someone who already knew the end of the story before even reading the beginning. The constant murmur of conversations swept through the room like wind through an iron door, carrying presumptuous comments about stocks, international travel, and million-dollar investments. However, the man remained silent, his posture calm and impenetrable, as if his presence there had a reason that went far beyond what anyone could imagine. That was the night when employees and important guests were celebrating what was supposedly the biggest deal the company had attempted in the last 10 years, and everyone was vying for space to be photographed as if they were the protagonists of that achievement. But nobody, absolutely nobody, had any idea that the real protagonist was sitting alone. Across the room, a woman in an emerald green dress, already drunk on wine and self-assurance, spoke too loudly while gesturing wildly with her arm laden with glittering bracelets. She was known for mistreating anyone she considered below her, and that included practically everyone who didn't frequent the same kind of expensive restaurant she posted about daily on Instagram. Her judgmental eyes swept across the room until they landed on the black man sitting alone. And there, in that distance that separates the arrogant from those they insist on ignoring, a crooked smile appeared on her face, the kind of smile that only exists when the intention is to hurt. She approached him as if walking towards an easy target, accompanied by two friends who laughed in anticipation. The music seemed to swell the moment she raised her glass, as if fate wanted to announce the scene before it happened. He looked up, not in submission, but with the calm of someone who has never needed to prove anything to anyone. And then, in front of everyone, the woman slightly twisted her wrist and poured the red wine over his head, the wine running down his hair, his face, his simple suit, while many around tried to hide their laughter, but ended up succumbing to the cruel impulse to feel superior to someone who, to them, was nothing more than an insignificant stranger. The room vibrated with muffled laughter, knowing glances and raised cell phones, attempting to record the humiliation as if collecting trophies of malice. He, however, remained motionless. He simply took a deep breath, wiped some of the wine from the corner of his eye, and maintained that serene expression which, being so tranquil, seemed out of place in the hostile scene unfolding around him. Meanwhile, the company directors, thrilled at the prospect of signing a $500 million contract, circled the room like peacocks displaying their plumes, talking to clients, toasting with investors, celebrating numbers and achievements they believed were already guaranteed. The presence of the black man there, a man no one had directly invited but whom no one had dared to ask, simply made no sense to them. And because it made no sense, they decided to ignore him, as they always do with anything they don't understand. But something bigger was about to happen, something none of them could have foreseen. As the party progressed and the humiliation he had suffered dissipated in the laughter of those who had already forgotten what they had done, a team of lawyers discreetly entered through a side door and made their way to the private room where the contract was to be signed. The atmosphere changed almost imperceptibly, as if a cold breeze had crossed the room without touching anyone. The lights seemed brighter, the conversations more restless, the gazes more attentive. Then, suddenly, an employee approached the central microphone and announced that the representative from the purchasing company had finally arrived, the one responsible for the decisive signature, the man who would validate the billion-dollar deal. Everyone straightened their posture, adjusted their ties, licked their teeth, and took a deep breath. The woman in the emerald green dress reapplied lipstick, as if she wanted to impress someone powerful, and then the door to the hall opened. The black man entered with firm steps, now accompanied by lawyers and directors of the acquiring company. The silence that filled the room was so profound that even the orchestra seemed to lower its volume. Shocking glances met, laughter was swallowed, and the same woman who had spilled wine on him felt her face grow cold. He walked to the main table, calmly opened the document folder, and then turned to everyone with a slight smile, like someone who knows exactly his worth. The woman, trying to compose herself, mumbled an apology too weak to be heard. But it was too late, much too late. There was the revelation no one expected. The man they had humiliated was, in fact, the real buyer, the owner of the company that was about to acquire everything they had been celebrating so much. And at that moment, even before signing, he firmly stated that respect is always the first clause of any contract. And only after that sentence did the room understand that the night had officially turned, and that power had never been in the hands of those who shouted the loudest, but rather in the hands of those who never needed to prove anything to exist. The room was still paralyzed with shock when the black man sat down at the head table, surrounded by the lawyers who now awaited only his final decision. An uneasy murmur ran through the room, as if all the gilded walls were beginning to whisper the same uncomfortable truth. They had humiliated the very man who held the financial destiny of that company in his hands. The CEO, until then considered unbeatable, approached trembling, trying to maintain his composure, but his voice faltered when he tried to say anything. He mumbled apologies, disjointed words, trying to justify his lack of control at the party, trying to transform the humiliation into a social accident. But the black man's gaze remained firm, calm, impenetrable, a tranquility so powerful that it made everyone feel even smaller before him. There was no hurry in his gestures, no need to prove anything. He simply awaited total silence, like someone who knows that true authority doesn't need to be shouted, only revealed. When the noise finally subsided, he rested his hands on the table, observed each face there, especially those of the people who had laughed, and said with a serenity that pierced the air, "It's amazing how people's character is revealed when they believe no one is watching." The phrase struck the room like a blade, and no one dared look away. The CEO tried to compose himself, wiped the sweat from his brow, and opened his mouth to speak about the $500 million contract, but the black man raised a hand, effortlessly interrupting him. The entire room fell silent. "I haven't decided yet if I'm going to sign," he said, and the impact of his words was so profound that some guests almost dropped their glasses. It was as if the ground had been pulled out from under the feet of the entire board. The company had bet everything on that deal, and the mere possibility of losing it caused a silent despair. The woman in the emerald green dress, now with smeared makeup, took 2 hesitant steps toward him, as if she could erase with tears what she had done, mockingly. I didn't know who you were. It was a misunderstanding," she murmured, unable to even hold his gaze. He observed her for a few seconds, with a calmness that made her tremble even more. There was no anger in his expression. There was something deeper, a clarity about the kind of person she truly was. "The problem isn't who I am," he replied slowly. "The problem is who you choose to be when you believe that no one is valuable enough to deserve respect." The silence turned into palpable shame. Some guests began to look at the floor. Others discreetly moved away from the woman so as not to appear complicit. The orchestra, unsure what to do, played low notes that barely filled the space. It was then that the black man stood up. The simple gesture seemed to command the atmosphere with more force than any powerful speech ever could have. He walked to the center of the room, leaving the still-closed contract on the table. Each step echoed like an announcement of a greater truth. "Before any investment," he said, "I evaluate people. Companies are a reflection of the human beings who lead them." The entire board swallowed hard. He continued, "Tonight, you have revealed exactly the type of leadership you allow to flourish here." The words were surgical, impeccable, impossible to refute. "And I wonder, if you treat someone you believe to be inferior like this, how will you treat your employees, your clients, your partners?" That question didn't need an answer. The CEO's face lost all the confident gleam it had displayed earlier in the evening. He understood that the signing of that contract wouldn't be decided by numbers, but by principles, and those principles had been shattered by the collective arrogance of his team. When the black man returned to the table, slowly opened the folder and removed the last sheet, the final page of the contract, everyone held their breath. He could destroy years of planning with a single gesture. He could rewrite the future of that company with a simple sentence. The woman in the emerald green dress, now completely defeated, fell to her knees, begging for forgiveness. But he didn't look at her. Not out of contempt, but because his decision wouldn't be motivated by ego, but by something greater. He signed the document. A collective sigh swept through the room, but the relief lasted only a second. Because, right after placing the pen on the table, he pronounced the sentence that would forever mark the history of that company. "The contract is signed, but there will be changes." A shiver ran through the guests. "From now on, every department will be restructured. People who lead through fear and humiliation will be removed immediately. I don't negotiate with cowards disguised as authorities." The CEO paled. He knew that many positions would be cut that very night, and that the transformation no longer belonged to him. The black man then discreetly pointed to one of the employees who had tried to defend him during the humiliation. A young intern whom everyone ignored. "You," he said softly, "tomorrow you will be promoted to the institutional relations sector. Leadership begins with respect." The young man almost collapsed with emotion, unable to believe what he was hearing. Meanwhile, those who laughed the loudest at the moment of humiliation now had their faces washed with fear of facing the fairest consequence. Being seen exactly as they were. Finally, the man put away his pen, closed his folder, and uttered the phrase that would become the breathtaking finale of the evening, a phrase that no one there would forget. "Today, you discovered that power isn't about shouting louder, dressing better, or feeling big. Power is about not needing to humiliate anyone to prove who you are." He turned, walked towards the exit while the hall remained in absolute silence, as if no one dared to breathe until he crossed the threshold. And when he finally left, leaving behind the glitter of the chandeliers and the golden dust of false appearances, everyone understood that this had not been just the signing of a contract. It had been the signing of a new destiny. A destiny where masks fell, egos crumbled, and dignity triumphed undeniably. The party continued only in memory, the lesson that would become eternal. And if this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone you love. Click now to share it, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories we're preparing with great care for you.